Hello and welcome to the August 31st JupyterLab weekly call. Today we've got 18 people on the call, and if you haven't already, please add your name to the agenda, which is linked in the chat. And if you'd like to talk about something, please add a bullet point in the agenda subsection. And if you have something that might take longer than, let's say, 5 minutes, add it to the additional discussion section. We've got 2 people on the agenda already, so that's a start. Hopefully there will be more. And why don't we get started with Jason W.
Hey, everyone. So I had a quick observation about triage because we were just before we started the recording talking about triaging issues. We have a weekly triage on Thursdays at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And it's often, with all due respect to people who show up, it's often a struggle to get people interested in coming to JupyterLab triage after the server call. So what would folks think about moving it to Wednesday after the close of this meeting so that folks who joined for the JupyterLab meeting could remain on for issue triaging?
You could only do that bi-weekly.
Oh, is there a conflict?
There's the accessibility meeting after this.
I'm sorry, I forgot about that.
Performance as well. Yeah, it's a rough one because the overlap between accessibility and performance in JupyterLab is high. So, and if you went an hour after that, you'd lose everyone in Europe.
Yeah, even the late time slot is problematic.
We have the half an hour before the notebook meeting. Is that possible?
It's possible, but it's like I'd like to catch people. It's like for those Americans about the same age as me, there was this notion of a time slot hit where if you wanted a certain TV show to be popular, you put it on after a very popular show. I want that with triage. I want triage to retain people from the lab meeting.
So this isn't going to help you on the weekly, Jason, but what if we ran a triage meeting after the community call?
After the community call, that's the monthly community call, right?
Yeah, that's the monthly community call. But like, you know, there's a lot of different folks that show up there.
Well, this past week, the community call ran right into the security meeting, and that's happened before.
Right. I forgot that happens. Yeah.
So it's something we have effectively a roughly 3-hour window on 3 or 4 days a week to do these kinds of meetings and be friendly to North America and Europe. So I'm okay with keeping the triage meeting as it is. I will also use this opportunity to encourage people to come to triage if you can, if your schedule can bear it. Because we've also recently started to triage notebook issues as well. Rosio is leading that portion. And if anyone wants to triage additional projects, more suggestions are welcome.
And I think if it turned out that call actually had too many people because there were too many projects being represented, we could start using the Zoom breakout room feature and still have like triage power hour or whatever. That would be a good problem to have. So
yeah, I'm not worried about that right now. I'm not worried about having too much triage interest. I want to cross that bridge when we get to it.
Hey, Jason, I'm curious, like, while we're, maybe if we're not done the logistics, I'm curious about how the triaging thing has been going. Like, what kind of positive impact have you guys been seeing on the project with it since you've been kind of keeping up? Like, what's the benefit for folks joining this?
Well, let me share in the chat the triage meeting notes so you can see how much stuff we're getting through. In a typical week, we usually triage about a dozen issues in lab and I would say low single digits numbers in notebook right now. And the impact of the project is that when people file an issue, they should expect that somebody is going to respond to it in some way within a week. And that encourages people to file new issues. We're also using this as an opportunity to be extra nice to newbies, people who have just filed their first issue. To even if they file something that's a duplicate or that we're not going to consider, we need to reach out to them and say, hey, thanks for submitting that. Thanks for, contributing and encouraging them to do so again. We've also occasionally looked at older issues or older pull requests, which I think we've had mixed results on it. One other effect is that the people who do the triaging sometimes get follow-ups from people who are curious about things or who want to submit a pull request or who want more information about the project. So we're effectively marketing ourselves as being actively involved with our own project and actively reaching out to people who are interested, and also encouraging people to, file well-formed issues as well.
Yeah, I think one of the points of utility from doing a triage call together is no one person has to feel completely on the hook for closing an issue that either has been abandoned or isn't well formed or whatever. At least you can say, hey, look, we had consensus. We talked about this. And I don't know, it seems like a harder thing to do on your own. So there was a suggestion in the chat from Ely about having the calls basically be at mutually inconvenient times and happening twice, so that it's always convenient for some people. I think we could try that. It would really be dependent on each one of those having at least one person who's willing to lead, because unlike some of the other calls, this one ends up featuring, like, it's a working call, right? So someone's sharing their screen and like doing this stuff. So if someone commits to a time that works for them, we will try really hard to make sure you're not the only person there.
Yeah, I think this is a good intention, especially if we want to bring folks in Asia Pacific into the fold. One other challenge is that, frankly, there isn't really enough triage load to fill 2 hours worth of effort. And I don't think 2 half-hour meetings would be worth the cost to coordinate. But if we want to kind of rotate through, rotate through the duty load, or we could start reviewing PRs, as Mike points out. This is probably the closest we come to operational load, is having this large backlog of PRs and issues in need of triage.
Well, there isn't that many new issues per week, that's true, but we've got like thousands of issues in the notebook repo that at the very least, if we closed them, would give peace of mind. So yeah, for the time being, we're not short on that. It's just, those are hard to do though. The older an issue gets, the harder it is to deal with it in a way that feels not arbitrary.
I mean,
so
go ahead.
Yeah, one of the ways we did some, before we did the JupyterLab triaging, we actually started because we were trying to do notebook triaging, because that's like when the PEP and all that, or the Jepkin stuff came out, right? So what wound up being actually really, the notebook triaging was fun because we just picked certain search or filtering parameters and start going through a bulk of things, right? Where it's like, oh, there's this one plugin that's mentioned a bunch of times. There's these things mentioned a bunch of times. But you can actually, like, using some of the search criteria and filtering, you can actually make that notebook issue event kind of purposeful. So like things that have high reaction numbers, just doing a little bit of filtering and cleaning up and having some eyes there, it can kind of help. There was one day when we got rid of like 20 issues just because we found lots of duplicates with a good search criteria,
Yeah, I mean, I think once an issue gets sufficiently old as well, for the good of the project, just, closing it out and asking people to reopen it can be annoying, but frankly, there are a lot of issues that just aren't going to get fixed, and or have already been fixed or are no longer relevant. I mean, that's frankly an annual goal. I think if we kind of nibbled away at the backlog in addition to triaging new issues, especially if we had multiple triaging sessions per week, we could get through it and end up with a kind of steady state, very low number of issues.
A seasonal trail cleaning. Let's get everybody together and clean up the trail.
There's also the fact that this becomes a really meaningful, helpful contribution that doesn't require you to fire up a text editor or an IDE. and is something where if you want to gain familiarity with the project, you're going to learn a lot. There's going to be people who remember some context about some issue. So, you know, it's a little bit like exercise. Like, you might not feel like it, but it will be actually beneficial. And if you do feel like exercise, that's good for you. Don't gloat.
Show offs.
Yeah.
But one of the things that y'all mentioned that like kind of I was like, oh, I haven't seen that yet, is doing pull request reviews. And maybe it's not the triage format, but maybe like y'all could record videos of how you triage issues, like or review pull request, or maybe get together with somebody and review the pull request. But like I think, you know, issues are nice, right? And pull request reviews are nice because they're ways for other people to come in. But yeah, I think it would be interesting to think about what kind of expectation somebody has when having their pull request reviewed by a big project.
This actually overlaps a bit with what has been going on with Jupyter Server and their contributing hour calls. So most of those are fixing a bug, adding a feature, or doing a common thing that, like, how do I write a server extension, that kind of thing. But I think within the remit of that would be, how do you review a PR? But that is very much oriented toward server and its ecosystem and less front-end stuff. And I know I've been asked about how do you do PR reviews. I certainly wouldn't feel great recording that, right? I don't want to record myself critiquing stuff other people have written, for sure. I'll do it for an audience, like, because I imagine we all have good faith toward each other and we're not there to be hostile, but I wouldn't feel great about posting that one on YouTube.
No doubt. No doubt. But even that like hour-long session of going through a pull request review with a candid audience, I have a feeling could be super powerful for people. I actually don't think we understand what y'all's lives are like.
Any other questions or comments about this issue before we move on? Okay, cool. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
All right, Mike, you're up next.
Three small issues. First is about the Python logo for Python files. So there was an issue filed from the Python trademark committee. They highlighted that the logo that we are currently using does not comply with the guidelines. So it doesn't have the eyes and the shape is slightly wrong. There isn't a problem with changing colors in principle. So we could apply and use a blue logo for Python to have the Python file icon as it currently is and as it shows in the file browser. We just need to adjust the shape slightly and add the eyes. And the alternative is to use the Python logo as this used for the notebooks and consoles without any changes to the colors. So in order to use the logo with different color, we would need to just submit a quick email and we got a reply that such a request would be approved. But my question is whether we want to go with the two-color logo, standard logo, so harmonize the use of logos, or to have a distinct logo for Python files to highlight that this one will not create a running kernel, so to make a distinction as it is currently.
I made a note on the HackMD and on the issue after seeing that. There's an open PR that we discussed, I think it's almost a month ago now, about switching to the standard logo. It's one that I cleaned up / customized for Elira, where I removed all the extraneous SVG gunk so we could easily recolor it for theming. And they added that in that PR. If we want it to stick to that like blue, we could still use that custom SVG that's all cleaned up and then just set it to blue in the CSS. But I think using that standard, their logo essentially, but just with a cleaned up SVG is probably the best way moving forward, whether or not we actually use the standard colors on it. So,
because the PSF has specifically asked for this, I would say that having a targeted PR that just fixes this thing quickly is preferable to the large PR.
I can open that. The PR that I linked isn't mine, but they were using an icon that I gave them. So I can just open it, PR myself with the icon I made. And then that can open the discussion on whether or not we want to adjust it to still use the single color or not.
Yeah, I think it would be good to clear with them whether it's okay to apply theming to the logo or whether each color combination would need separate approval. Because they did have some concern about that there needs to be enough contrast between the color and the background and these kind of things, right? So
yeah, this is me speaking from previous research, not discussions with specific people. But as far as I could understand from previous conversations and discussions online and from their own documentation, essentially grayscaling it. So like setting it to a solid color for contrast, as long as you're still using their icon, is allowed.
Okay.
allowed with approval or allowed without approval?
As far as I could tell, without approval, but I would still, for my PR, I'd still ping the person who raised this and ask them to confirm that.
So I took a pretty detailed look at the guidelines, and they are inconsistent. In one place, they say that you can do that without approval, and in another, they they suggest that you ask for approval whenever you change the colors. But in the issue that we linked, there is that both people on the committee suggested that it's likely that we will get approval just for the bookkeeping to take a formal note of the request that they suggest we submit a formal request via email.
On a separate note, though, do we even care about getting it all in one color for our use case, or are we okay using the icon as is? There's lots of screenshots on both the issue that I linked, and if anybody's ever opened a Lyra, we've already been using this icon in a Lyra for years. As far as my opinion, it contrasts perfectly fine. But is there any issue with just not having to deal with this whole color thing, but just using the icon as is? Or are people here on this call really wanting to keep it to like a solid icon?
I think that the initial thought was something to disambiguate kernel versus file. What do you think about that?
I'd never thought about it that way, because the kernels already use a separate icon because kernels provide their own PNG, and it's pretty clearly a different icon, just size, contrast, pixelization. It's actually been a complaint with our customers using a Lyra. They're like, hey, why aren't these the same icon? They're both Python. But like as a Lyra, we're just providing Jupyter as is, so we can't fix what the kernels that they are using are providing. We can only tell them, hey, that's on your kernel. But that has been an issue in the past for our customers, but from a different direction than I think you were meaning.
So for the sake of resolving this sooner, because we've got an actual complaint from the PSF, why don't we take Mike's suggestion from the chat and take a quick poll. So if you want all blue, I will ask you to raise your hands or thumbs up or whatever, and we'll count those. And then if you want as is, I'll ask again. So with that being said, if you want all blue, please do an emoji. Am I seeing one thumbs up? Is that correct? Okay. If you want, okay, Vidar asks, as is the iPy kernel icon. Yes. If you want that, do an emoji. I got a baseball, a thumbs up, a party hat, 2 thumbs ups. All right, so far it's 4-1, it seems. Oh, wait a minute. New information has come in. We might have to do this all over again. That's right. The icons in the file browser are affected too. Does that change people's votes? Keep in mind, they're smaller. Should I do this again?
As a note, if you want to see what that looks like, you can look at the screenshots in the OpenPR.
Great. That's helpful too.
I think I have that open. Where is that? Yes, there are screenshots in the OpenPR that show the icons in the after images, both light mode and dark mode, what it looks like.
Okay. With that new context, again, if you want all blue, do an emoji now. At least he's consistent. Cool. All right. And if you want the 2-color one, do an emoji now. Okay, it still seems like the 2 colors winning. Are we unblocked? Can we move on this?
I think we can. And
Cool.
The new SVG makes iteration very easy. Changing this in the future, if we don't like it, is trivial.
Okay.
It's literally change the CSS value. Wow.
So this changes things for some people and doesn't change things for other people. But now there's still this inconsistency that was just mentioned with the logos for the kernels.
The kernels provide their own logos.
I understand that. So I've deployed a few kernels and stuff like that. So right now the kernels look for a logo with a file name and a PNG to it. And when we've been doing audits at 400%, those PNGs don't work, right? So by shipping around the PNGs as the logos, we actually can't get accessible icons for the kernels. Is it that calcified to the point where we couldn't reuse something from JupyterLab, or is there a possible way to reuse some of the stuff you all have?
So this is based on some research I did back when we first switched to lab icons. I believe in theory, we could do a refactor that switches kernels to use lab icons, but it is not trivial.
I think that's what I was looking to hear, Alex. Thank you.
And there's lots of pitfalls, because what if an icon doesn't exist in the lab icon like choices?
Right. Yeah, because we were talking about going and, hitting the major 3 like Julia, R, and Python, right? But that means we'd have to make pull requests to 3 different repos, go through a bunch of different things there. If we could reuse some components somehow, I think it would circumvent some extra effort in having these features.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It would be worth opening an issue. It is something.
I will report back.
Yeah, it is something that our customers have complained about, the resolution of those icons compared to the rest of them in JupyterLab.
There is already an issue about this. I linked that in the chat. And I just wanted to highlight that the proposed icon in the pull requests that Alex mentioned, it doesn't seem to be have the gradient. would that be easy to add the gradient back so that it reflects the original Python logo perfectly?
I can actually give you a hard no on that. SVG gradients require the use of IDs, and IDs in SVG files is incompatible with our current implementation of lab icons. This is something I fought against with the R logo in Elira. I had to make a custom version of the R logo that removed its gradient. But on the note of gradients in the Python logo, that is actually not part of their standard logo. The icon that you see in that PR, I copied that directly from their site, like in their, I forget where I got it exactly, but it's the icon that they provide saying, this is our official SVG, and it does not have gradients. The official Python SVG does not have gradient support as I downloaded it from the official web.
I don't think this is correct because I also copied an official SVG yesterday and it had gradients. So maybe they've changed that.
Possibly. I copied ours about a year and a half ago. It was right after we switched to lab icons. But I can look into that as part of my PR. But I do know as a fact gradients won't work with lab icons. We could open an issue to address that. I have considered doing that, but when I tried an initial attempt at fixing it inside core, it was a nest of issues that I decided I wasn't worth my dev hours because no customer had asked me to do it.
Okay, there's a bunch of chatter in the chat that might be beneficial, but I'm not going to read it all out because it's a lot. Is there anything else we need to talk about for this issue, or is it clear what happens next?
I am pretty sure I am clear.
Okay. Cool, thank you. I'm going to take this moment to remind everyone that if there is something you'd like to talk about, please add it to the agenda.
What I was saying, and apparently I was muted, so there definitely was some icon work done within the last year and a half, because my tangent team had some people working on it. So I'm not clear on the details, but there was some work done. So I was just checking in on that.
Cool. Cheers, Andrew.
Yeah. And as a acknowledgement, I did just reopen the website that I got that icon from, and the one that is there now does have a gradient. So it seems that gradient was added to the official icon during that icon work this year, as you mentioned.
Okay, how about we move on? Oh, actually, I guess I have two updates to make, but they're totally unrelated to each other. The first one is Lumino2 and Jupiter Lab. And even though we are still working on the Lumino2 release and there are still more features and performance enhancements that we need to make, because the biggest API changes have already been merged. We've published alphas, and I've linked to the PR to migrate JupyterLab from Lumino 1 to 2. And there's a work in progress migration guide in the Lumino Read the Docs page that talks about the changes from Lumino 1 to 2. If you look at the PR, it touches a lot of files, but it's not actually a particularly heavy PR. And it is indicative of the sort of work you will have to do to migrate your extension over from Lumino 1 to 2, aka JupyterLab 3 to 4. Once this PR is in, we can publish another JupyterLab alpha and apply the same treatment to Notebook 7. But Notebook 7 depends both on lab packages and on Lumino packages, so we can't do that right now. If you'd like to contribute to this, there is a Lumino2 project board with some outstanding issues. I've linked it before, but let me find it again because all the help we can get is appreciated. And if someone wants to work on bringing Lumino2, here's the project board, bringing Lumino2 to Notebook 7, I planned on doing it just because I made the biggest API changes this time around, and I've got the experience of having done this with JupyterLab already, so it should be fairly straightforward for me to do with Notebook 7. But if someone wants to learn about this part of the stack and wants to port Notebook 7 from Lumino 1 to 2, probably next week when we have these packages published, I am happy to help you with it. And if not, I will do it myself. But if you want to work on this, I guess get in touch. I will write an issue in the notebook repo today, so you can either ping me there or find me on some other channel. I'm not hard to find. Yeah, I know any questions about what's in this, because it's kind of big, but I've also brought it up enough times that you might already know and not want to hear it again. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is totally unrelated, and it is about project governance. So I've also brought up all of the things I'm about to say a bunch of times before, so please forgive me for repeating myself. But we're aiming for the JupyterLab Council to be fully formed and to pick its software steering council representative by October 3rd. So I think we decided mid-September is when we want to have the deadline for nominations of a member of the JupyterLab Council to represent this project on the SSC. And so if you want to nominate someone, Fred has sent out a link to a Google form that he created. Just please make sure that you have confirmed with that person that they want to be nominated, that they would accept if they actually were voted in, and add them if you wish. There are a few constraints. One is you have to be a member of the JupyterLab Council. Two is you cannot be both on the newly forming Jupyter Executive Council and the newly forming Software Steering Council. So if you actually want to run for the Jupyter Executive Council, then don't do SSC. And three is, again, if you want to nominate someone, just confirm with them that they want to do it. But beyond that, go to town. And in the interim, if there's someone you would like to nominate to join the JupyterLab Council, please do. I think Jason Grout is on this call. So if there's something that I've missed that you can fill in, I would appreciate it. +1 to reminding people every weekly meeting about this. Okay, cool. Well, you'll hear this from me again then, unless it's Jason next week. All right, so with that, has anyone added anything else to the agenda in the interim? No, cool. Is there anything you would like to talk about while we're still recording? Otherwise, I will stop the recording. Okay. Brace yourselves.